Most people have heard the name Kazakhstan. But very few could point to it on a map. Even fewer understand how large it really is. In a world obsessed with superpowers, financial capitals, and global hotspots, Kazakhstan rarely dominates headlines. It is not a country that most people spend much time thinking about. And yet, it covers an area larger than all of Western Europe. It is the 9th largest country on Earth. A nation so vast that traveling from one side to the other can take days. A place where entire regions disappear into endless horizons. Where the landscape stretches so far that the sky seems larger than anywhere else on Earth. And despite its size, Kazakhstan remains one of the least understood countries in the modern world. To many outsiders, it exists only as a blank space between Russia and China. A country people fly over. A country people rarely visit. A country often forgotten. But geography has a strange way of shaping history. And some of the most important places in the world are not the ones constantly attracting attention. They are the places quietly sitting beneath the surface of global events. Places that influence trade, energy, politics, technology, and the future of entire continents. Kazakhstan is one of those places. At first glance, the country appears almost empty. Large portions of its territory are covered by steppe, desert, and semi-arid plains. There are regions where a person can drive for hours without seeing another vehicle. Places where the nearest town may be hundreds of kilometers away. From above, the landscape seems endless. A sea of grass. A sea of sand. An ocean without water. But this emptiness can be deceptive. Because throughout history, these vast open spaces have connected civilizations. Empires crossed them. Merchants crossed them. Armies crossed them. Ideas crossed them. For thousands of years, Kazakhstan sat at the center of one of humanity's greatest networks of movement. Long before airplanes. Long before highways. Long before the modern nation-state. The land that would become Kazakhstan was already connecting east and west. It was a frontier. A bridge. A crossroads between worlds. And even today, that role has not disappeared. It has simply changed shape. Modern Kazakhstan occupies one of the most strategically important locations on Earth. It borders Russia to the north, China to the east, and sits at the heart of Central Asia. Its territory links Europe and Asia. Its railways connect continents. Its resources power industries around the globe. And beneath its soil lies some of the materials that modern civilization depends upon every single day. Yet for many people, Kazakhstan remains invisible. Perhaps because it lacks dramatic coastlines. Perhaps because it avoids the constant crises that dominate international news. Or perhaps because its greatest characteristic is something difficult to appreciate in the modern world. Space. In an age of crowded cities and shrinking distances, Kazakhstan still feels enormous. Wild. Open. Unfinished. There are few places left on Earth where geography remains so overwhelming. Where nature still dominates the horizon. Where the scale of the landscape reminds people how small they truly are. To understand Kazakhstan, it is necessary to understand that scale. Because everything about this country begins with space. Its history. Its culture. Its economy. Its politics. Its identity. For centuries, the people who lived here adapted to a world without walls. A world where movement meant survival. Where entire communities followed the rhythm of seasons across the steppe. Where the horizon itself became part of everyday life. And even as cities rise and technology transforms society, echoes of that world still remain. Kazakhstan is often described as a bridge between Europe and Asia. But that description only tells part of the story. Because bridges are usually crossed quickly. People move across them without stopping. Without looking. Without noticing. And that is exactly how much of the world treats Kazakhstan. As a place in between. A place on the way to somewhere else. But some places deserve to be understood on their own terms. Not as a route. Not as a corridor. But as a world unto themselves. This is the story of Kazakhstan. A country larger than most people realize. More important than most people imagine. And far more fascinating than the map suggests. To understand Kazakhstan, you first have to understand the steppe. Not a city. Not a government. Not a border. The steppe. Because long before there was a Kazakhstan, there was this. An immense ocean of grass stretching across the heart of Eurasia. A landscape so vast that early travelers often struggled to describe it. There were no mountains to guide them. No forests to shelter them. No oceans to define the horizon. Only distance. In every direction. For thousands of kilometers. Even today, much of Kazakhstan feels empty. Not because nothing exists there. But because the scale is difficult for the human mind to process. A road can run straight for hours. A train can travel across the horizon for an entire day. Entire regions contain fewer people than a single neighborhood in a major city. From space, the country appears almost motionless. A patchwork of grasslands, deserts, lakes, and dry plains. But life here has never been easy. The Kazakh steppe experiences some of the most extreme temperature swings on Earth. Summers can push above 40 degrees Celsius. Winters can fall below -40. In some regions, temperatures fluctuate by more than 80 degrees throughout the year. The wind rarely stops. Storms arrive without warning. Snow can erase roads overnight. And during the summer, drought can transform entire landscapes. For centuries, survival here depended on movement. The environment rewarded those who adapted. And punished those who remained still. This was not a world built for permanent settlements. It was a world built for mobility. The grasslands provided food for animals. The animals provided survival for people. And together they created one of the greatest nomadic cultures in human history. Unlike the civilizations that emerged along rivers and coastlines, the people of the steppe lived in constant motion. They followed seasons. They followed grazing routes. They followed opportunity. The horizon was never a barrier. It was an invitation. Generations learned to navigate open landscapes with extraordinary precision. They understood weather patterns, water sources, animal migrations, and the rhythms of a land that outsiders often viewed as empty. But the steppe was never empty. It was alive. Filled with movement. Filled with stories. Filled with people who understood the land in ways that settled societies rarely could. For thousands of years, these grasslands connected distant civilizations. Caravans crossed them. Merchants crossed them. Armies crossed them. Ideas crossed them. Long before the modern world built highways and railways, the steppe served as one of humanity's great transportation networks. Goods traveled between east and west. Cultures mixed. Languages spread. Empires expanded. And throughout it all, the vast open plains remained. Silent. Patient. Unchanged. Even now, standing alone in the Kazakh steppe can feel strangely unsettling. There is so much space. So much sky. So little to interrupt the horizon. Modern life conditions people to expect boundaries. Buildings. Road signs. Infrastructure. But here, those references begin to disappear. And in their place comes something increasingly rare in the modern world. Perspective. The realization that human beings occupy only a small part of a much larger landscape. That the world is still capable of feeling enormous. And nowhere is that feeling stronger than in the endless grasslands of Kazakhstan. For most of human history, the steppe was not a place people settled. It was a place they moved through. The environment was simply too unpredictable. A river that provided water one season might disappear the next. Grasslands could flourish one year and dry out the following summer. To survive here, people needed flexibility. And over centuries, the inhabitants of the Eurasian steppe developed a way of life unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. They became nomads. Rather than building permanent cities, entire communities traveled with the seasons. Families packed their homes onto carts. Livestock moved across enormous distances. And the rhythm of daily life became tied to the land itself. Movement was not a choice. It was survival. Among all the animals that transformed the steppe, none was more important than the horse. Long before railways. Long before highways. Long before engines. The horse changed everything. Historians often describe the domestication of the horse as one of humanity's most important technological revolutions. And much of that story begins on the grasslands of Central Asia. Here, mobility became power. Distance became less of an obstacle. And entire cultures emerged around horseback travel. A skilled rider could cross terrain that would take others days to navigate. Communication accelerated. Trade expanded. Influence spread. The steppe was no longer an empty landscape. It became a highway. One of the largest highways in human history. For thousands of years, merchants, travelers, and explorers moved across these lands. Some carried silk. Others carried spices. Gold. Ideas. Religions. Languages. What later became known as the Silk Road was never a single road. It was a network. A vast web of routes stretching across continents. And Kazakhstan occupied a central position within it. Goods flowing between China and Europe often passed through these open plains. But trade was only part of the story. The steppe also produced warriors. Some of the most feared horsemen in history emerged from lands like these. Generations grew up riding from childhood. Learning to hunt. Learning to fight. Learning to survive in one of the world's harshest environments. Their relationship with the horse became so deep that many early travelers described horse and rider as a single unit. To outsiders, the speed of steppe armies seemed almost impossible. They appeared suddenly, moved rapidly, and vanished back into the horizon. For centuries, this mobility shaped the balance of power across Eurasia. Empires rose. Empires collapsed. But the steppe remained. And so did the people who called it home. Life revolved around the yurt. A portable dwelling perfectly adapted to movement. Light enough to transport. Strong enough to withstand harsh weather. Warm during brutal winters. Cool during the summer heat. Its design reflected centuries of adaptation. Every part served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Even today, the yurt remains one of the most recognizable symbols of Kazakh culture. Not because people still depend on it for survival, but because it represents something deeper. A connection to a world that existed long before modern borders. Long before nation-states. Long before the concept of Kazakhstan itself. For generations, identity was not defined by fixed lines on a map. It was defined by clan, family, movement, tradition, and the land. The horizon that seemed empty to outsiders was filled with meaning. Every valley, every river, every seasonal route, every grazing ground. Together they formed a living map passed from one generation to the next. A map that existed entirely in memory. And for centuries, that knowledge allowed people to thrive where others struggled to survive. Today, modern cities rise across Kazakhstan. Glass towers reflect the sky. Highways cross the steppe. Technology connects distant regions. Yet echoes of the nomadic world still remain. In traditions. In music. In celebrations. In the deep cultural importance of horses. And in the way many Kazakhs continue to view the landscape around them. Because while the modern nation is relatively young, the relationship between its people and the steppe stretches back thousands of years. To understand Kazakhstan is to understand that history. A history written not in stone walls or ancient monuments, but across open grasslands beneath an endless sky. For centuries, the vast grasslands of Central Asia belonged to the people who knew how to move across them. The steppe rewarded mobility. It rewarded adaptability. And it favored those who could survive in a world without permanent borders. But history rarely leaves such places untouched. Sooner or later, every frontier attracts outside powers. And Kazakhstan was no exception. Throughout its history, the steppe witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires. Some arrived from the east. Others from the west. Many believed they could control the land. Few truly understood it. Among the most influential forces to ever emerge from the Eurasian steppe were the Mongols. In the early 13th century, a leader named Genghis Khan united scattered tribes into a military force unlike anything the world had seen before. What followed was one of the largest expansions in human history. Within decades, Mongol armies crossed continents. Cities fell. Kingdoms disappeared. Trade routes shifted. And the political map of Eurasia was transformed. The territory of modern Kazakhstan became a crucial part of that world. Not merely conquered land, but a strategic center connecting distant regions of the empire. The steppe that once seemed empty became one of the most important corridors on Earth. Ideas moved through it. Goods moved through it. People moved through it. And for a time, an unprecedented zone of connectivity stretched across Eurasia. But no empire lasts forever. As Mongol power fragmented, new states emerged. New alliances formed. And over time, the Kazakh Khanate began to take shape. It was here that many of the foundations of modern Kazakh identity were established. Yet another power was already moving south. The Russian Empire. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Russian influence expanded steadily across Central Asia. Forts appeared along the frontier. Settlements grew. Administrative control increased. The open steppe gradually became part of a much larger imperial system. For local communities, this brought profound change. Traditional migration routes were altered. Political structures shifted. And a way of life that had endured for centuries faced growing pressure. The transformation accelerated even further in the 20th century. When the Russian Empire collapsed, a new force emerged. The Soviet Union. Few places would experience Soviet rule as dramatically as Kazakhstan. Moscow viewed the vast territory as a place of enormous potential. A land that could be reshaped. Industrialized. Modernized. And integrated into a new vision of society. Gigantic projects appeared across the steppe. Railways stretched across regions once traveled only by horse. Factories rose from the plains. New cities expanded rapidly. Millions of people arrived from other parts of the Soviet Union. Entire communities were relocated. And Kazakhstan became one of the most diverse republics in the USSR. But progress came at a cost. Some of the most painful chapters in Kazakh history unfolded during this period. Forced collectivization disrupted traditional nomadic life. Livestock populations collapsed. Famine spread across large areas of the country. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Many more fled. A society built around movement was suddenly forced into a completely different system. And the consequences were devastating. Yet this was only one of the Soviet Union's experiments in Kazakhstan. Another would leave scars that remain visible even today. Deep within the steppe lay a place known as Semipalatinsk. For decades, it served as one of the Soviet Union's primary nuclear testing sites. Beginning in 1949, hundreds of nuclear explosions were conducted in the region. Some underground. Others above ground. Entire communities lived near the test zone, often without fully understanding the risks. The effects would be felt for generations. Radiation exposure. Environmental damage. Health problems that persisted long after the Cold War ended. It remains one of the most significant nuclear legacies on Earth. And yet, despite everything that happened during the Soviet era, Kazakhstan continued to evolve. Cities expanded. Universities opened. Infrastructure connected distant regions. A modern society emerged across the steppe. The country was changing faster than at any other point in its history. Then, in 1991, everything changed once again. The Soviet Union collapsed. Its republics became independent states. And for the first time in modern history, Kazakhstan stood on its own. The challenge was enormous. A country larger than Western Europe. A population spread across vast distances. An economy deeply tied to a system that no longer existed. The future was uncertain. But independence marked the beginning of a new chapter. One that would redefine Kazakhstan's place in the world. Because while empires had come and gone, the steppe remained. For centuries, Kazakhstan was known as a land of grasslands, horsemen, and endless horizons. A place defined by distance. A place shaped by movement across the earth. But in the 20th century, something extraordinary happened. The vast emptiness that once allowed nomads to roam freely would serve a completely different purpose. Instead of crossing the steppe, humanity would begin crossing space itself. Deep within southern Kazakhstan lies a place called Baikonur. At first glance, it seems like an unlikely location for one of the most important sites in human history. The surrounding landscape is flat, remote, and largely empty. But that isolation was exactly what made it valuable. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union began searching for a location where it could test long-range rockets. The site needed enormous amounts of open land. It needed clear skies. And it needed to be far from major population centers. The Kazakh steppe provided all of it. Construction began in secrecy. Workers arrived. Railways were built. Launch facilities emerged from the desert. What had once been open wilderness was transformed into the largest spaceport on Earth. And soon, history would be made. On October 4, 1957, a rocket lifted off from Baikonur carrying a small metal sphere known as Sputnik 1. The satellite weighed less than 84 kilograms. Yet its impact was enormous. For the first time in history, humanity had placed an artificial object into orbit around the Earth. The space age had begun. The world would never be the same. But Baikonur's greatest moment was still ahead. Less than 4 years later, another rocket stood on the launch pad. Its passenger was not a satellite. It was a human being. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin climbed aboard the Vostok 1 spacecraft. Moments later, the engines ignited. The rocket rose into the sky. And humanity left Earth for the first time. The flight lasted just 108 minutes. Yet those minutes changed history forever. Millions watched. Governments reacted. Scientists celebrated. And a new era began. The first human in space had launched from the Kazakh steppe. For decades afterward, Baikonur remained at the center of the global space race. Cosmonauts trained there. Rockets launched there. Missions departed from there. The facility became one of the most secretive and strategically important locations in the Soviet Union. Even today, its significance remains remarkable. The International Space Station, scientific missions, cargo flights, human spaceflight. Many continue to trace their origins back to this remote corner of Kazakhstan. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 created an unusual situation. Suddenly, the world's most famous spaceport was no longer located inside Russia. It was located inside an independent Kazakhstan. The solution was unprecedented. Russia continued using Baikonur under a long-term lease agreement. A reminder of how important the facility remained. Today, Baikonur stands as a symbol of two different worlds. One ancient, one futuristic. Outside the launch complex, the landscape still feels timeless. The same open horizons. The same vast distances. The same steppe that shaped generations of nomads. Yet from that same landscape, rockets continue to climb toward the stars. Few places on Earth capture such a contrast. A land once defined by horsemen became the birthplace of human spaceflight. A region once known for its isolation became connected to the future of humanity. And perhaps nowhere else does Kazakhstan's story become clearer. Because throughout history, this land has always been a bridge. A bridge between East and West. Between past and future. And in the case of Baikonur, between Earth and space itself. From above, Kazakhstan often appears empty. Vast grasslands. Remote deserts. Endless horizons. But beneath that landscape lies something far more valuable. Resources. Lots of them. In fact, modern Kazakhstan sits atop some of the largest reserves of natural resources on Earth. Oil. Natural gas. Uranium. Coal. Copper. Chromium. Rare metals. The country's wealth is not immediately visible. Much of it is hidden underground. Yet these resources have helped shape Kazakhstan's modern identity and influence its role in the global economy. Perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than along the shores of the Caspian Sea. Beneath its waters lie enormous oil reserves. Some of the largest discovered in recent decades. For years, international energy companies invested billions of dollars into developing these fields. Pipelines stretched across continents. Export routes connected distant markets. And Kazakhstan became one of the world's leading energy producers. Yet oil is only part of the story. Because one resource is even more important. Uranium. Most people rarely think about uranium. But modern civilization depends on it. It powers nuclear reactors. Generates electricity. And plays a critical role in the global energy system. Today, Kazakhstan is the world's largest producer of uranium. Producing more than any other country. By a significant margin. From Europe to Asia, power stations rely on fuel that originated beneath the Kazakh steppe. It is one of the country's most important contributions to the modern world. And one of its least visible. Beyond uranium, Kazakhstan possesses enormous reserves of copper, zinc, iron ore, and rare metals. Materials essential for modern technology. Electric vehicles. Renewable energy infrastructure. Industrial manufacturing. The products people use every day often begin their journey in places they never see. And many of those journeys start here. But resource wealth comes with challenges. Economic dependence. Environmental concerns. Global market fluctuations. For decades, Kazakhstan has faced the difficult task of balancing development with diversification. The question is one faced by many resource-rich nations. How do you transform natural wealth into long-term prosperity? How do you build an economy that can thrive beyond extraction? In recent years, Kazakhstan has invested heavily in infrastructure, technology, and industry. Seeking to expand beyond raw materials alone. The goal is not simply to export resources. but to become a major economic hub connecting Europe and Asia. And geography once again plays a central role. Because Kazakhstan's location is just as valuable as the resources beneath its soil. A fact that is becoming increasingly important in the 21st century. As global trade routes evolve and new economic corridors emerge, the country finds itself at the center of a rapidly changing world. The same land that once connected caravans now connects supply chains. The same steppe that carried merchants now carries pipelines, railways, and trade networks. And once again, Kazakhstan occupies a position far larger than most people realize. Its influence may not always be visible. But it is everywhere. In the electricity powering homes. In the fuel moving economies. In the metals used to build the technologies of tomorrow. Hidden beneath the surface, Kazakhstan helps power the modern world. Geography has always shaped Kazakhstan's destiny. Its vast territory connects regions, cultures, trade routes, empires. And in the 21st century, that position may be more important than ever before. Because Kazakhstan sits between two of the most powerful countries on Earth, Russia and China. To the north lies the world's largest country. To the east, the world's second largest economy. Few nations occupy such a strategic position. And even fewer have managed to balance relationships with both neighbors for so long. On a map, Kazakhstan appears surrounded by giants. But geography is not always a weakness. Sometimes it becomes an opportunity. For centuries, merchants crossed these lands carrying goods between east and west. Today, that role is returning. Only now, the caravans have been replaced by trains, highways, pipelines, and global supply chains. Every year, millions of tons of cargo move across Kazakhstan. Containers travel from Chinese factories toward European markets. Rail corridors cut across the steppe. Freight terminals operate around the clock. And the country has become one of the most important transit hubs in Eurasia. The modern world runs on connectivity. Speed matters. Efficiency matters. And geography matters. A shipment traveling by sea can take weeks to reach its destination. By rail, the journey can often be significantly shorter. As a result, Kazakhstan's location has become increasingly valuable. Particularly as governments and businesses search for new routes linking Europe and Asia. Yet geography also creates challenges. Balancing relationships between major powers is never simple. Throughout history, countries caught between larger neighbors have often struggled to maintain independence. Kazakhstan faces that reality every day. Its leaders must navigate a complex landscape of diplomacy, economics, and security. Maintaining strong ties with Russia. Expanding cooperation with China. Building partnerships with Europe. And strengthening relationships across Central Asia. It is a delicate balancing act. One that requires patience, flexibility, and careful decision-making. But Kazakhstan has spent decades developing exactly those skills. The country has often pursued a multi-vector foreign policy. Seeking cooperation with different partners rather than relying too heavily on any single one. In many ways, this approach reflects the country's geography. A bridge rarely belongs to only one side. Its value comes from connecting many different places. And Kazakhstan continues to serve that role. As global trade patterns evolve. As energy markets change. As new transportation corridors emerge. The country's importance continues to grow. What was once viewed as a distant corner of the world is becoming a central link in some of the most important networks on Earth. A place where continents meet. Where economies connect. And where the future of Eurasia is increasingly being shaped. For most of history, Kazakhstan stood at the crossroads of empires. Today, it stands at the crossroads of the modern world. And the decisions made here may influence far more than the people living within its borders. For most of its history, Kazakhstan was shaped by forces beyond its control. Empires arrived. Borders changed. Trade routes shifted. Ideologies rose and fell. Yet through it all, the steppe endured. The vast landscape that shaped generations of nomads remains one of the defining features of the country today. But the 21st century presents a different challenge. For the first time in modern history, Kazakhstan has the opportunity to shape its own future. And that future is being built at remarkable speed. Few places illustrate this transformation better than Astana. In the middle of the steppe stands one of the world's most unusual capitals. A city of futuristic towers. Glass skyscrapers. Modern architecture. And ambitious urban planning. Only a few decades ago, this was a relatively small regional city. Today, it serves as a symbol of Kazakhstan's aspirations. A vision of what the country hopes to become. Modern. Connected. Influential. Yet development brings new questions. Economic growth has transformed much of the country. Infrastructure continues to expand. Investment continues to arrive. And international connections continue to strengthen. But new challenges are emerging as well. Climate change is already affecting Central Asia. Water resources are becoming increasingly important. Extreme weather events are becoming more common. And the balance between economic growth and environmental sustainability grows more complicated each year. Like many nations, Kazakhstan must decide how to adapt. How to modernize. How to compete in a rapidly changing world. And how to preserve its unique identity while embracing the future. The answers are still being written. But one thing is clear. Kazakhstan's story is far from over. In many ways, it may only be beginning. For much of the world, Kazakhstan remains a distant country. A place rarely discussed. Rarely visited. Rarely understood. Yet those who look closer discover something different. A nation shaped by geography. A nation shaped by movement. A nation shaped by resilience. From the horsemen of the steppe. To the caravans of the Silk Road. To the rockets of Baikonur. The story of Kazakhstan has always been connected to journeys. Journeys across continents. Journeys through history. And sometimes, journeys beyond Earth itself. Perhaps that is why Kazakhstan is so difficult to define. It is not simply a country of the past. Nor is it merely a country of the future. It is both. A place where ancient traditions and modern ambitions exist side by side. Where endless grasslands meet futuristic skylines. Where one of humanity's oldest ways of life shares the same landscape as one of its greatest technological achievements. And maybe that is what makes Kazakhstan so fascinating. Not its size. Not its resources. Not even its strategic location. But its ability to connect worlds. East and West. Past and future. Earth and space. In a world that often focuses on the loudest places, Kazakhstan remains something different. Quiet. Vast. Often overlooked. Yet impossible to ignore once you truly understand it. Because sometimes the most important places are not the ones constantly making headlines. They are the places that quietly shape the world around them. And few countries do that more than Kazakhstan.